ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help. The following program is brought to you by Arlington Community Media, where we tell your story.
From McLennan Park to Spy Pond, from Poets Corner to the Mystic River, we have Arlington covered, giving you stories that count from people who care. Reliable, trustworthy, dependable. This is the nationwide award-winning ACMi News.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of ACMi News. I'm Doug Flateau. Welcome home. It's not just a lovely sentiment. It's also the name of the very timely exhibit currently installed in the main gallery of Arlington Center for the Arts. Featured are the work and stories of local artists who are either immigrants or first-generation Americans. It's a powerful display of creativity and community connection. And ACMi recently paid a visit to see the art and talk to the organizers.
So when Delia called and said, hey, do you want to curate this exhibit? And the theme is around first generation and immigrant artists in the community of Arlington. And Arlington has seen an increase in migrants arriving to Arlington. And as a way to acknowledge what's happening socially, she's like, do you want to help us curate a show that celebrates the diversity of culture and the artistry of immigrants and first generation in Arlington? So that's the genesis of it all. And it's also serendipitous in the fact that the show moved from when it was to happen at some point last year to the beginning of this year, where there's been a lot of conversation around with what's happening in Washington, with, the new president and everything that's happening. So it was almost our way of speaking out by saying, hey, welcome home, that Arlington and the whole region as a whole is definitely a home for diverse voices, but specifically that artists always had something to say. And that was an opportunity for us to highlight what people bring with them when they come to this country, and in some instances, what they had to leave behind to pursue, the dream of insert what the American version of that dream is for them.
Yeah. So we always collect an artist statement from every artist, and we say we may, display this with the work. In a lot of shows, it doesn't necessarily provide the amount of context that was kind of important for this show. So once we selected all the artwork, we reached back out to all the artists and said, if you're interested, we'd love you to share a bit about each piece that was selected. And we had, I think, almost all of our artists respond. And then we also offered them the opportunity to share that language in their native language as well, which is featured in some of the works. And we did pretty extensive outreach to a number of local cultural organizations, both within Boston and even out into, surrounding suburbs. And then obviously, really working with Arlington artists as well. This show really brought in a nice diversity of artists in terms of people who are familiar with ACA and people who had also exhibited with us before. So we have a number of artists who have been with us in various capacities, exhibiting, teaching, displaying at our Open Studios event, and also a number of artists who were brand new to ACA, had never heard of us before, but knew that we were featuring work from immigrant and first generation artists, and that was something that brought them into our space.
And I would say that diversity is also evident in the modalities of art that is exhibited here, but also a wide range of ages. We have someone as young as 16 to folks who are definitely more seasoned artists in their own practice, and including folks who do this professionally and those who do this as a means of self-care and building community. For me, as someone who grew up in the Caribbean with Haitian parents, coming in here, it felt like home. And I was grateful that, other artists also were able to participate in that. We are a country that wants to continue being built with the contribution of immigrants. on the eve of the 250th of the independence and even of the incorporation of Arlington. I think it's timely to remind folks as well that it takes pieces of each of us from various parts of the world to come here and build America to what it is. So we're not doing anything different than what our forefathers have done or imagined that this country would provide for us.
We've had at least 2 artists in the show who told us they hadn't exhibited before who have now applied to our next show. And so for me, that's really important because I think we always need to remind ourselves to keep our arms open and continually make space for new artists, because as we know, the more people we bring into this community, the richer the conversations, the richer the interactions, the richer the relationships that we can build that really benefit not only ACA, but the greater community as well.
If you'd like to see the show, and it's worth a visit, you'll have to hurry. It closes on Wednesday, March 19th. And after you take in the potent Welcome Home exhibit, head out to the adjoining hallway for another rich and provocative artistic experience. As is news to nobody at this point, Arlington will be joining with surrounding communities to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War. We will all be taking in a lot of the familiar stories from our founding and history. But how about those stories that have remained largely untold? That's the question this exhibition from ArtLinks seeks to address.
ArtLinks Arlington is a network of artists who puts together an annual exhibit at the Arlington Center for the Arts. This year, their exhibit, As We Turn 250, Arlington 250, The Untold Stories, amplifies these voices in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and Arlington's contribution to it. We at ACMi were able to speak to Lori Bogdan, a member of ArtLinks and the curator of this exhibit.
Well, this is a difficult theme. People in Arlington aren't necessarily aware that the 250th anniversary of the start of the Revolutionary War is coming up this April. And they don't know that there are a lot of hidden stories about the 250th. So we had to explain during the call to art so we would get some interesting content. This is my piece. It's called Threads of Revolution, and it tells 2 stories. One, it talks about the craft that people had during the colonial times, both weaving and the craft that they had to have this battle.
We were also lucky to speak with a few of the featured artists within the exhibit, including Marilyn Downs, a landscape artist whose piece, Kate Dreams, focuses on Kate, an enslaved woman who lived in the historical Jason Russell House during colonial times.
And I chose to paint her as I imagined her because the history of enslaved people in New England and in Arlington is often an untold story, which is the theme of this show. So the show itself kind of spoke to me, like the idea of untold stories, and as much as, we're kind of telling the story of the American Revolution, and we kind of like celebrate that and mark that part of our history often in this area. I think there are many people in Arlington who don't realize that there were enslaved people who were in this town. We often think, oh, that was in the South, that was somewhere else.
Frank Tadley, a photographer based in Arlington, is also one of the artists featured in the show.
Every year there's a reenactment, so I took photographs from last year's reenactment to represent that. Well, the day itself, I probably took 300, 400 pictures. So the most difficult thing was trying to find 2 or 3 that really summed up the different parts. So one of them shows a layout at the Jason Russell House, which is a very historic house here in town, and shows how things looked and felt at that time.
We were also able to speak to Bo Han, whose piece depicted the Robbins Library located in Arlington Center.
Here I was trying to kind of capture the fact that although we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, this has been a evolving history where the foundation is there, but things have to change and evolve with the times to meet the needs of the community.
We encourage you to engage with Arlington history and artists by visiting the Arlington Center for the Arts and seeing the ArtLinks exhibit As We Turn 250, Arlington 250, The Untold Stories.
I've learned more about Arlington history than I ever knew just in the last few months. And it's been nice to gather the people for this show because they too went out and did a great amount of research on all of the history and the historic buildings and such. And it's nice to see that come together in one show.
As you heard, the artists themselves learned a lot of history they didn't know. Now it's your turn. Regular viewers of ACMi News will be familiar with the fact that we have a rodenticide problem in our society. Arlington is actually at the forefront of the effort to ban second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SGARs. These highly toxic rat poisons can be fatal to area wildlife, as we have sadly documented in recent years. We wanted to get an update on the situation, so we reached out to a local activist who spearheads an organization called Save Arlington Wildlife.
Shown here is a bait box containing rat poison that was found broken open last month on Whole Foods property. At another Whole Foods location, a Cooper's hawk was found dead, bleeding from its nose and mouth, a clear sign that it had been poisoned. Meanwhile, Laura Kiesel's organization, Save Massachusetts Wildlife, has been collecting and testing dead raptors exposed to the poison, several of which are from Arlington. Despite some setbacks, Arlington has been a trailblazer in the fight to end the use of SGARs. Thanks to the efforts of local wildlife advocates such as Kiesel, there are several major legislative developments to watch out for this year in the battle against SGARs.
There is now a state proposed legislation to ban anticoagulants, both the first and the second generation. And I really do think that Arlington helped change the discourse.
Here in Arlington, Kiesel is also involved in the resubmission of what's known as a home rule petition to ban the use of SGARs on private property.
We cannot ban on private property without special permission from the state. And to do that, we actually have to submit what's called a home rule petition. And it has to go through the state legislature like any other bill. Even though it only is about Arlington and banning in private property on our borders, it still has to be voted through by the whole legislature to become law and allow us to do that. Arlington was the first municipality back in 2022 to pass in their town meeting a home rule petition resolution that they wanted to ban these poisons on private property. State law dictates, though, after 2 legislative sessions, if it does not pass, it expires. And then, if we want it to be resubmitted or refiled in the state house, we have to, again, have another vote in town meeting. So this town meeting, it will be coming up for a vote. Arlington has been a trailblazer on this issue since we submitted our home rule petition in 2022. 8 other municipalities have also submitted home rule petitions asking for the same thing.
Finally, Kiesel's local organization, Save Arlington Wildlife, filed a legal petition to the state pesticide board last year. That petition called for 2 things.
We wanted them to evaluate the safety of these chemicals, which we were asserting we think do an undue burden on our environment, and then to suspend registration, so not allow these chemicals to be applied while they were doing that evaluation. After many months, just right before the Christmas holidays, they actually decided they finally voted in favor of conducting a third-party evaluation. However, they have not followed through with the second half of our ask, which was that these poisons be suspended in use while they're conducting that evaluation. So we have tried to continue to exert some pressure to say, like, we would like you to stop allowing these chemicals while that evaluation is being conducted. But so far, they have not responded to our requests.
Kiesel urges Arlington residents to contact their select board and Congress members to press them to support upcoming anti-SGAR legislation efforts.
I do also want to offer a lot of thanks because a lot of Arlington-specific organizations have stepped up and submitted letters of support to the pesticide board, including Friends of Menotomy Rocks Park and Friends of Spy Pond Park, and many other organizations, both state and national, did as well. And if you are active in an organization and want to submit a letter of support to the pesticide board, I feel like that those can always help leverage the importance of this issue and make it more likely that hopefully they will suspend these chemicals. Just please contact me at savemawildlife@gmail.com.
Clint Hill is a name that might be familiar to ACMi News viewers. He was the Secret Service agent who leaped onto the back of President John F. Kennedy's limousine to shield the stricken president and First Lady on that fateful day of November 22, 1963. A couple of years back, ACMi's former news director, Jeff Barn, was able to secure a couple of extended interviews with Clint Hill about that day and other memorable experiences from his service under 5 U.S. presidents. Clint Hill passed away 2 weeks ago, and we would like to offer the following excerpts from our interviews with him in tribute to this American hero.
I hear this explosive noise over my right shoulder from the rear. I didn't recognize it initially to be a gunshot. It could have been a firecracker, could have been any number of things. So I started to turn toward it to see if I could determine what it was, where it came from. And in so doing, my eyes had to pass across the back of the presidential vehicle. And when I did that, why, I got as far as the president, and I see that he is now gone like this. He's grabbed his neck and he's starting to fall forward. That I then realized had been a gunshot. So I jumped from my position and ran toward the presidential vehicle, hoping to get up there on top of the back of it to form a barrier or a shield there for President and Mrs. Kennedy. I had a little bit of difficulty getting because there was a motorcycle officer right immediately to the left of the car I was in. And that engine of that noise, or that engine of that motorcycle was making a lot of noise, and the car engine was making a lot of noise. So I couldn't hear anything. And later on, the agents told me there had been another shot fired when I was running. And just before I got to the back of the car, there another shot was fired. And that one hit the president in the head. At that time, he had fallen to his left more, and his head was down almost against Mrs. Kennedy's cheek. And that bullet then entered right back here, and it exited right up here with just like an explosive exit of material, bone fragments, brain matter, all kinds of tissue, blood. It was terrible. And when that happened, Mrs. Kennedy then came up on the trunk. And I was trying to get up on the trunk myself to form that shield. But just as I got my one foot up on the little step on the back of the car that was made there for us to do this on, the driver hit the accelerator and it finally clicked in with this heavy car that kind of jerked forward, and I slipped off. And I had to run a couple extra steps in order to get up on top of the back of the car. When I did, Mrs. Kennedy was already up on the trunk. She was grasping at some of the material that came out of the president's head, trying to retrieve it. She did get a hold of some of it. I grabbed a hold of her and put her in the back seat. And when I did that, the president's body fell farther to its left with his head in her lap. And the right side of his face was up. I could see his eyes were fixed. I could see a hole in the head. I could see there was no brain matter in that general area. I assumed it was a fatal wound. And I turned and gave a thumbs down to the follow-up car crew to make sure they knew what the situation was. And then I screamed at the driver to get us to a hospital.
That'll do it for this week's edition of ACMi News. We will reluctantly be taking a hiatus from these newscasts for a while due to funding and staffing shortages. We will, however, continue to produce and release individual news stories. So if you have any news tips for us, stay tuned for how to contact us. I'm Doug Flateau. Thanks as always for joining us.
You can always check out our latest segments and newscasts on the web at acmi.tv/news. And don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at ACMi News. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. You'll find us at youtube.com/ACMi News. If you have any news tips for us or wish to become a citizen journalist, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at news@acmi.tv or stop by ACMI Studio A at 85 Park Avenue.
ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.